Can you make sure that finds a good home? No, not you. Can you make sure that finds a good home? A certain cute young lady bounces up to me full of energy, this morning and says, I was trying to think of a way to turn your microphone off. So she tells me she wants to do a practical joke, and I'm guessing those are your shoes. Yeah. So you see how that works. I love kids, I just do. The other night, I was visiting with this adorable family, and you'll figure this out. So I go in, they've suffered a loss, and I see the missus, and she asked, how are you doing? And I said, well, I think I'm doing a whole lot better than you are. And I said, how are you doing? And she said, I'm fine. And so I just had I said, no, you're not. Gave her a big hug, and just loved on them. But in the midst of that, there's this adorable little guy comes up and just wants to crawl in my lap, and sometimes you just got to be playful. So we're talking serious stuff, but he, can't even really talk, and he pulls out his little book, and he wants me to read his book. So you're going between talking to mom and dad, and then you're talking to a cute little guy out of his book. Isn't it fun being playful sometimes, even in the midst of serious things? And by the way, many of you are just plain uptight. Thank you, Bill. Praise that the Lord laid on your heart to say what you did this morning. You need to clap once in a while. You need to jump up and down once in a while. There is a video somewhere on the internet of me jumping up and down in Ethiopia. You can find it if you search. But you need to loosen up and be playful, because personally, I think Jesus was playful. I think there were times you could just kind of see the grin inside of him as he's dealing with some of his disciples, because sometimes they were pretty uptight. I have to tell you, they were pretty uptight. So we're going to look at a passage this morning, Luke chapter 24. Go ahead and turn there. And I'm telling you, this is a story. Today's passage is Behold the King, but this is a story of 7 sad miles. I just want to, this is in the days when people walked. So can you imagine walking and in a state of sadness and despair and hopelessness? And there's 7 miles of this, and Jesus shows up, and I see the playful side in him in this passage. I do. But at the same time, these guys are struggling. So you got it. Luke chapter 24, we're going to start at verse 13. That day, that very day, 2 of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they were talking with each other about all these things that had happened. Now, what had happened? Jesus had been crucified. All hope was lost. I mean, it's a pretty bad day. But this is Sunday. And as you're going to find out, there's some stuff going on. But these guys are still sad. You have to ask yourself, if there are reports going on, why are they sad? So, while they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near. And I if I were him, I'd be sitting there, and there'd be inside of me, I can't wait. I can't wait. But Brenda, I would be a little on the playful side. I would. I'd play with them a little bit, because it's all going to work out. I mean, it's the end of the story. You know how it all goes, and I think that's what's going on here. So he says, I think he's just going, let's see what happens here. So while they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him. I think that's the playful part. Maybe he's being serious and just protecting them at this point. But notice what happens next. And he said to them, what is this conversation that you are holding with each other as you walk? And they stood still, looking sad. You got it? Then one of them, named Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know what things that have happened in these days?" And he said to them, "What things?" And they said to him, "Concerning Jesus of Nazareth." It's like, "You knothead, do you live in a cave? I mean, do you live underneath a rock someplace and you see it? I mean, you're just, who is this guy?" "Concerning Jesus of Nazareth, a man who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the only one, he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things happened. Moreover, some women of our company amazed us." Okay? But it was women, so you can't trust them. It might be gossip, you know. "They were at the tomb early in the morning, and when they did not find his body, they came back saying that they had even seen a vision of the angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see. And so he said to them, 'O foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory?'" Okay, now this next part, I'm wondering how many of you I can get away with on this. And beginning with Moses and all the prophets. So, how many books are in the Old Testament? 39. He preached 39 books to them. Yeah, think about that. So, beginning, it's 7 miles and you're walking. It takes a little while. So, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. So, they drew near to the village to which they were going. He acted as if he were going further, but they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, for it is toward evening, and the day is now far spent." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took the bread and blessed it and broke it and gave it to them. And their eyes were open. It finally dawned on them, and they recognized him. And he vanished from their sight. Do you see the humor in this? I do. And again, some of you are uptight, so you may not see the humor right there. They said to each other, "Did not our hearts burn within us while he talked to us on the road, while he opened to us the scriptures?" Now this next little section, we're going to fast forward, but Jesus really turns on the screws at this point. This is necessary things that they needed. Up until this point, there's just rumors that Jesus is resurrected. But now he's really calling them to great things. So verse 33. "And they rose that same hour and returned to Jerusalem." And they didn't wait around. Remember, they said, "Hey, it's nighttime. We've got to go in." Now no, we got to get up and go. And they returned to Jerusalem. It's 7 miles. So all the way to Emmaus, all the way back. And they found the 11, and those who were with them gathered, saying, "The Lord is risen indeed. He has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road and how he was known to them in the breaking of the bread. As they were talking about these things. You got it? Are you there in the room? Jesus himself stood among them. How'd you get in here? I mean, really? Hey! And said to them, "Peace to you." But they were startled and frightened and thought they saw a spirit. And this is important what happens next, because they're thinking he's a disembodied spirit. And he said to them, "Why are you troubled, and why do doubts arise in your hearts?" Now, I've been defending Jesus up to this point, but I have to tell you, there's a part of me, I realize how we humans operate. So he asks this question, and you just can't side with the disciples. And so this is, I think this is the unwritten response. I don't know, Jesus, we don't often talk to dead people. I mean, it's just, give us some credit here. This is strange, this is odd. I don't know, maybe something strange is going on here. Verse 39. See my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Touch me and see. I'm a human being, I'm a body. For a spirit does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have. And when he had said this, he showed them his hands and feet. And while they still disbelieved for joy and were marveling, he said to them, have you anything here to eat? You see the playful part? Okay, you guys got something for me to eat? I'm a little angry. And maybe he didn't say hangry. That might be a 21st century term. I don't know. So he's just showing them, I'm alive. They gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate before them. Then he said to them, these are my words that I spoke to you while I was still with you, that everything written about me in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms must be fulfilled. Now keep in mind, their hopes were crushed because they were looking at the same scriptures but coming to a much different conclusion. That's important. We read out of the same Bible, and sometimes people can come to different conclusions. And Jesus is saying, no, all of this was predicted in the scriptures. They're taking and looking, and they were envisioning something much different. Then he opened their minds to understand the scriptures and said to them, thus it is written that the Christ should suffer and on the third day rise from the dead, and that repentance for the forgiveness of sins should be proclaimed in his name to all nations, beginning from Jerusalem. You are witnesses of these things, and behold, I am sending the promise of my Father upon you, but stay in the city until you are clothed with power on high. And I have to tell you, those words change the world. That presentation changed everything. The resurrection changed history. Here's what happened in that short little weekend. A problem was shut up, but salvation rose up. Boy, did the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the priests, did they hate Jesus. I mean, it wasn't just an inconvenience. An inconvenience you can kind of, mutter under your breath and you can just walk away. But this guy, they wanted to shut him up. He was everything they were not. He stood for everything they did not. He just upset their entire world, and they did not like it, so they planned to murder him, and they just needed to shut him up. And what better way to shut somebody up than to kill him? But did you see what God did? Salvation rose up. God used that to save the world. I mean, that's pretty amazing. Hope died. A hope died. And that's important. It wasn't that hope itself died, only a picture of hope. Remember the disciples were reading the same scripture, and the two on Emmaus, on the road to Emmaus, were saying, we thought he was going to redeem Israel. They thought for sure there was going to be a king who was going to rise up and reestablish Israel. That was their hope. But God had a much different dream. Do you see that? So a hope died, but promise responded. You got it? It was the promise that God was going to save mankind. So a hope died, but promise replied. Now here's the biggie. Again, back to the Pharisees and the Sadducees. I mean, this group that thought they were so smart and so powerful. I mean, they didn't even have the power over life and death. The Roman government had the power over life and death, but they thought they were smart enough to manipulate people into a murder plot. You got it? So here's this guy who was a threat to them, a warrior, and they thought they made him cower. They thought they silenced his disciples, that they could handle it from this point forward. But I really want you to think about what Paul said in Romans chapter 8. But our conqueror rose to power. Jesus defeated death, but he also defeated death for us. And that's why Paul says in Romans 8 that we are Hooper Nike. We are super conquerors through Jesus. But here's another biggie. The myth of rulers died. Almost from the beginning of Israel's history, they had this idea that all we need is a king. And you know, they're no different than us. How many times have you heard people say something like, all we need around here is, and you fill in the blank. All we need is a law to change this. All we need is to do this, or take these things away from these people and it'll stop it. Or all we need to do is hand this to these people and they're going to be better. All we need is this. And generally, that involves around politics. There's so many of us that just think that our solution is another president or king or dictator or politician or county mayor. All we need is this person and things are going to be better. But, I want you to pay attention to this. Behold, creation's king. You know, all God ever wanted from the very beginning was mankind to be his people and for him to be their God. And then he tells Samuel on that lonely day when the people are crying out for a king, just like we all do, even all these thousands of years later, hey, all we need is the right president and things are going to get better. And all God wants is for him to be our king, our God. Simple. So how does God solve that? He not only defeats death, he not only turns murder into salvation, but he shows us what the real king looks like. So the next time you're whining about a president, just remember, Jesus is still king. But here's the biggie. Mercy paid mankind's fee, and grace set them free. You know how those two work, don't you? Mercy is not getting the punishment we deserve. And so Jesus was mercy on the cross. And at that moment he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? The Son of God, who had never known separation from his Father, had a complete and total onslaught of God's wrath. The last time you looked at porn on your computer, and how angry God got, that went on Jesus. The last time you cheated on your taxes, and God's anger poured out on Jesus. The last time you kind of flirted with that girl at work, or that guy at work, or whatever your sin might be, you drank too much, you partied too much, you woke up and, oh, who's this next to me? All that wrath for all that wrongdoing was yours. And Jesus became mercy and took that onslaught of wrath for you. He didn't just stop there. He gave us grace. And grace is getting what you don't deserve. And so when he resurrected from the dead, he says, guess what? You don't have to worry about death anymore. You don't have to worry about the grave. You don't have to worry about what comes after this life. As a matter of fact, here's what I'm doing for you. If you follow me, if you believe in me, My dad's preparing a mansion, and it's big. I mean, it's not as big as it could be, because there's a lot of people that aren't going to be in there. I want it to be bigger, but Dad's adding on rooms, and every time somebody goes into the waters of baptism, there's a new room added on in this mansion. Every time. That's grace. Do you see what happened on that Sunday? Humanity's chains were no more. This changed everything. And when I say everything, I really want you to think about how much everything has changed from that moment forward. We changed the way we measure time. Yes, we talk about Christmas and the year of Jesus' birth, but the truth is, we would not measure or mark the month of Jesus' birth or the year of his birth if it hadn't been for that resurrection. If he had just been a good religious teacher, who would care when he was born? I mean, you know Billy Graham's birthday? He's pretty important. No. Jesus changed everything because of his death, his burial, and his resurrection. The disciples themselves changed not a little bit, but radically. Before the resurrection, they went to synagogue. They went to the temple. After the resurrection, they were the church. You know, that's one of the biggest challenges we have today, is because we still think we go to church. And I hate to tell you this, but wherever two or more are gathered, that's the church. Period. You know, it just changed. Worship changed. Keep in mind, in the New Testament, there's no record of special services. They make oblique references about those who say, hey, you're not cool unless you go to this special service or this special Sabbath. And Paul, in particular, Peter, both say, be careful of those people that do that. But they didn't record, for example, a Christmas service. Do you see Christmas in the New Testament? Do you see any of those special? I mean, is Paul sitting in prison someplace and he's just saying, oh man, they're having sunrise service this morning and I'm missing it. Timothy, can you fix that for me? You see that in either 1st, 2nd, maybe 12th Timothy. Is that in that book? No, here's one of the things that changed. Keep in mind, in the very beginning, they were Jewish Christians. And their worship day, their Sabbath, was from sundown Friday until sundown Saturday. It was Saturday. And almost immediately they start meeting every day. But very, very quickly, worship starts to shift to the first day of the week. Look at Acts chapter 20, verse 7. Just goes like that. That they met for the purpose of breaking of bread on Sunday, on the first day of the week. That was their purpose. So, almost from the beginning, they started talking about Resurrection Sunday, not as a one-time-a-year event that we might show up for, but every Sunday was Resurrection Sunday. Because it was the Lord's Day. That was the day he made victory over death. So immediately, even their worship days changed. But if you really want to know how Jesus changed everything, look at those closest to him. My, how they changed. Their identities changed. They became people of name changes and identity changes. Here's just a few. Simon became Peter. Yes, you can respond. Saul became Paul. Joseph became, I knew I'd get you on that, Barnabas. You remember that? Yes. Acts chapter 4, verses 32 and following. His real name was Joseph, but he was known among the disciples as Barnabas, son of encouragement. Isn't that interesting? But the big change was John. His old identity was James and John, the sons of thunder. They were, if you wanted to have a bar fight, if you were planning on one, if anybody's planning on a bar fight, then so who would you take? James and John, they were sons of thunder. But then there's traditions. He's the last disciple left alive. It's in the 90s. He's probably in his 90s or close to it, and they're carrying him around on a stretcher. And their nickname for him was the Apostle of Love. Their identities changed. Everything about them changed. But here's a few other changes. Political zealots became zealots for Christ. The reason we have those lists in the New Testament that talk about their names and their titles and where they came from and what they did is so that you know what changed, what priorities changed. So Simon the Zealot, he doesn't stay a political zealot. They didn't have the first century version of Facebook, and he wasn't posting, well, this is what I believe, we need to really change this country. No, what do you see Simon doing? Simon's getting awful passionate about Jesus and bringing people to Jesus. But he's not the only one. Professional fishermen gave up their nets. They gave up their businesses and fished for men to become followers of Christ. Pharisees gave up their traditions and became followers of the way. One Pharisee in particular, see if you can figure this guy out, hunted followers of Christ. Yes. And then he started to hunt man to become a follower of Christ. Big difference. They died in prison. They died in boiling oil. They died covered in tar and were set ablaze as torches in Nero's Rome so that they could light his palace at night. They died on crosses. They died in arenas. They died by sword and spear and cross and rope, all for Jesus. He changed everything. I mean, we whine about you can't pray in school now. Oh, and that's like a big, big deal. I don't know. I can pray in school. I've prayed in school. I've been a teacher and talked with kids about Jesus Christ in school. You can do a whole lot, but I don't have anybody knocking down my door, coming for me, wanting to throw me in prison and then take me to the arena and feed me to a lion. I think I don't have a leg to stand on when it comes to whining. Do you? It is a much different world merely because we live in a cushy place at a cushy time. But that's not even true for people around the world. I mean, it was different. But I just want to share with you about Matthew himself. Remember, he was also called Levi. Before the resurrection, he was known as a sellout. Politically, you can't get much more of a sell. This guy, and I just think that the whole group of 12 was amazing. You had Simon the Zealot, who is on one polar political extreme. And you have Matthew the tax collector, who is on the other end of the political extreme. You can't get, I mean, it's like, I don't know, I'd probably offend you if I came up with names about the political difference today if we were to put two different people together. One political extreme versus the other, hanging around the same guy. Do you know what happened with Matthew? Tradition tells us that Matthew, after the resurrection, went and evangelized in different countries. Ethiopia loves, when I was there, they love two characters in the Bible. They love the Ethiopian eunuch, and little Dundee, who's been here, just loves talking about the Ethiopian eunuch. That's just funny to him, you know, because an Ethiopian is mentioned, but number two, they love talking about Matthew because they have traditions down there that Matthew came to Ethiopia and evangelized the country. And it was there that someone took a sword, tradition. We don't know it for a fact. But they stabbed him in the back with a sword. And so here's what happened. The sellout became sold out for Jesus. So here I ask you this morning, on this Resurrection Sunday, and praise God, isn't it, that it's Resurrection Sunday? But it's just a date on a calendar. Every Sunday ought to be a day that we're excited about. Every Sunday marks the Lord's Day. Every Sunday is the day we signify that He resurrected from the dead. Every Sunday we take the Lord's Supper and commemorate that. It's not just a special day. Every day is special because we live in Jesus Christ. But are you sold out yet? Is your life not moderately changed? Not minimally changed? But is your life radically changed for Christ? Are you sold out? I contacted 2 widows this week and just let them know I was praying with them. But I want to tell you about 2 sold-out men I had the pleasure of meeting. I'd only known for 6 months. But to me, how you face trial is an indicator of the depth you had in your life. And so, in the months that we watched, and all I ever knew was Joel sick with cancer. That's the only thing I ever knew. I called Bonnie the other day, Friday, Good Friday would have been the anniversary, not 365 days, but the significant anniversary of him passing. Do you remember Joel, frail, emaciated, beaten down, taking these, and you know what chemo is? Chemo is literally poison. So they heal you by pumping poison in your body. Sick as a dog. And he comes dragging into church. Not because he goes to church, but because he was, and still is, by the way, the church. I love that testimony for Joel. And just like your widow that gave her $100, everything she had. I just think Joel gave everything he